Welcome to the Rockin Rich Lynch on the Radio Show. I'm your host, Rockin Rich Lynch, inviting you to join me as we discover great new music by bands and artists from around the world. With interviews, music news and reviews, great prizes, and a whole lot more. Visit us online today at soundpress.net for great music promotion and publicity. Hi, this is Rockin Rich Lynch, and you're listening to the very best of Rockin Rich Lynch on the radio. We recently moved our operations from the New York, New Jersey market to Nashville, Tennessee, and we are now looking for a production and broadcast partner in the region to take the radio show to new heights. If you're a band, musician, solo act, or represent a musical project in any genre, please visit soundpress.net and our new site, musiccitynashville.net, to learn how we can help get your message to the world. Now, please enjoy this great interview from our archives. Ladies and gentlemen, the person we're speaking to today helped launch Jefferson Starship into commercial success. The band eventually earned 20 platinum and gold albums with him in the lineup. He was the only member to appear on every Jefferson Starship and Starship recording, and he went on to launch a successful solo career as an award-winning new age and contemporary jazz guitarist. We are talking about Craig Chaquico, and he's on the line with us right now. Craig, thanks so much for being on the program.
Hey, thanks. Same to you, Rich. Thank you for having me. That was a nice introduction, by the way. Wow, somebody's been looking into my history a little bit.
Well, you know, it's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm actually a fan. That's what I do, and that's why I do this, Craig. I try to reach out and talk to the people who really made an impact on me when I was growing up and I was just a kid.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be in that such good company, man. Thanks.
You certainly are. Craig, the first thing I want to know is, was your phone ringing off the hook a few weeks back when the death of a Starship guitarist hit the news?
Rumors of my death have been greatly over-exaggerated. Who said that? Mark Twain. It was. I mean, the headline was Starship guitarist dies, and, you know, that's kind of one of those things that when you read it, you have to pinch yourself if you're a Starship guitarist. But I felt really bad for the guitar player and his family and the band and everything, although I did not know him. You know, he joined the band, I think, in 2001, you know, and all the songs they played were, you know, recorded in the 80s and stuff, and of course I was on all those records, but with the various guitar players that have come and gone, I think he's the only one that that passed away like that, and I can only hope that, you know, we all go doing something we love, you know, and he's a guitar player. He must love his guitar and his music, and, you know, I have to say, you know, if you're going to go, maybe that's a great time after a great performance somewhere, and he certainly had tons of fans and people that had appreciated his playing, but I did have a lot of people think it was me, you know, and, you know, I got these calls like, hey, man, you still owe me money, you can't die yet. No, I shouldn't joke about it, but it was, it was a trip because it makes us all feel a little bit more mortal, you know. I mean, you as I get older, I notice that more people that I, you know of are passing away, and it just kind of makes you appreciate every day we have with our friends and our family and stuff. So,
yeah, this guy, his name.
Yeah, I did get a lot of phone calls.
His name was Mark Abrahamian. He was 46. He died of a heart attack after playing with Mickey Thomas's Starship early in September, and another one of the long line of musical losses that we've all had to go through this year. So all the best, like you said, Craig, to Mark and his family. We certainly don't want to make light of it, but I was just interested to know if you did get some calls.
Yeah, I mean, it was very misleading too, because the headlines all said guitars for Starship dies, and then they list all the songs I played on, and, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's like I said, it's a reality check, and my heart goes out to his friends and family, and I pinch myself that I'm still above ground for another day to enjoy mine, you know, and I guess we can all be thankful and grateful for that. And, you know, his music lives on. I know they did live recordings and stuff, and he was a big part of the Mickey Thomas Starship, which is a little different than Jefferson Starship and Starship, in that Mickey's the only one from the band in his band from the original group, but yet I know that there's so much good music out there that he's doing and did with Mark that at least there's that'll live on for a long time, you know.
Hey, Craig, I hope you got a couple of minutes because I got a lot of things I'd like to ask you, but I will reset and let everybody know that we're talking with Craig Chaquico. He's the longtime guitar player for Jefferson Starship and Starship. He is got a new album coming out on October 16th, 2012. His debut on Blind Pig Records. It's called Fire Red Moon. We've been checking it out and spending a lot of time with it, Craig. Like it a lot, and it's a bit of a departure for you, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Let me go back. As mentioned, you were the only member in every version of Jefferson Starship, even appearing on most of Paul Kantner and Grace Slick's solo efforts from the early 70s. I wanted to tell you, Craig, that Flowers of the Night is one of my favorite recorded songs of all time. That's off the Baron von Tolbruth and Chrome Nunn record, and your lead work on that song was just incredible.
Wow, that goes back quite a ways, man. That we're talking like 71 or something like that, I think. And thank you for saying that. That was one of my first recording sessions there when I was first getting started playing with everybody that ended up being in Jefferson Starship with me. As you know, it was kind of an evolution from Jefferson Airplane, with me kind of taking over for Jorma Kaukonen and Pete Sears taking over for Jack Cassidy, and then we sort of went from there. But if it wasn't for those sessions and doing songs like Flowers in the Night and getting to know everybody in the studio, I probably never would have gotten asked to join the band. So that's one of my favorite songs too. Thank you for being aware of that.
So what, do you got some wah-wah work on that?
Yeah, oh yeah, and I just, I used to live and breathe my little wah-wah pedal and my little guitar rig, man. That's all that was the center of my universe. And I knew it so well that one time we were recording and the Doobie Brothers were across the studio from us years later, and one of their wah-wah pedals wasn't working. And if you've never really sat down with one and, taken it apart, you might not know exactly some of the little things. And I knew exactly what was wrong with it. And I went in there with a Swiss Army knife and opened it up and fixed the wah-wah pedal. I always felt really good that I was able to help, Pat Simmons and Tommy out with a little wah-wah pedal issue they had.
Well, I hope they took care of you.
Oh, always. They helped me out with a few issues with my Harley a few times, where they gave me some advice on my motorcycle. So full circle.
Now, let's go back early on about how you started. I read that early on you turned a personal tragedy into a triumph, and you ended up having a similar story to Les Paul. And the whole event was also motivated by the fact that you would acquire a Les Paul. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my dad and I were in a bad car crash. We were hit by a drunk driver, and I woke up in the hospital with 2 broken arms, a broken leg, broken thumb, broken wrist, broken ankle, broken foot. I mean, everything was in a cast. And my dad was pretty banged up too, but he was still a big inspiration to me. And he told me about Les Paul. He said, Les Paul is a great guitar player, had a guitar named after him, and he was in a bad car crash, and he got through it, eventually with a lot of hard work through the physical rehab and all that stuff. And my dad told me, if you work really hard and you get through this, which I know you can, when all the casts come off and you can use your hands, and again, I'll buy you a Les Paul. And my dad kept his promise, and he bought me a Les Paul, and that was my first electric guitar. And up until then, I'd just been playing acoustic guitar. And there's actually a picture in my studio from the hospital days where I'm sitting there with a big smile on my face in the bed with all my arms in casts and my leg in this huge cast that goes up to my hip. But I've got this little acoustic guitar, and I'm happy because that music was really something that got me through a very difficult time, And since then, I actually wrote a song on one string on the guitar, because if you look at that picture, you can see that I can only really reach one string. The way my fingers stuck out of the cast, you can only reach the high E string. So I wrote a song on the high E string, and I dedicated it to my doctor, whose name was Elizabeth. And since it was on the E string, I call it E Elizabeth Song, and it ended up on a Grammy-nominated album, 30 years later. But you're right, if it wasn't for my dad and keeping a promise for getting me a guitar and sticking to my physical therapy and my recovery through my wheelchair and crutches and corrective shoes and all, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I wouldn't be playing music. So thanks, Dad. I know he's smiling up there because he really encouraged my music, and he was a musician himself.
Yeah, Craig, I did see that picture. You looked pretty banged up. Was a Les Paul your weapon of choice over the years?
Well, it was at first. A lot of the early Starship records were done with a Les Paul. And then I started working more with a company based out of California that makes amazing guitars and amps and everything that I record my albums with, actually. They make speakers and mixing boards and microphones. And the company is Carvin Manufacturing. They're based out of San Diego area. And since the 70s, I've been using their equipment, But I started by playing, Les Pauls and Stratocasters, and then realized that I still have those, by the way. But I also use more Carbon than anything because I can get all those same sounds out of their one guitars, you know, their models and stuff. So they've been terrific. In fact, you know, one of my first guitar idols was the lead guitar player in Quicksilver Messenger Service, John Cipollina, who first told me about Carbon, and his brother Mario later started playing with Huey Lewis, and he played on my first tour. Mario played bass on my very first solo tour, and then the lead singer for Quicksilver, David Freiberg, was one of our lead singers in Jefferson Starship. So there's a connection that goes way back to me and those bands and idolizing them, and then them actually turning me, their lead guitar player, telling me about Carbon, as did Jorma Kaukonen and his little brother Peter Kaukonen. They were all aware of Carbons before I was. And so that company's been around since the 40s. They're a really amazing California, you know, company, and I am really honored to be able to play all their instruments.
Yeah, that's very cool, and I'm well aware of the extended family nature of the whole Jefferson Starship, you know, family tree there. I did get to meet Peter Kaukonen at a Paul Kantner Jefferson Starship show back in the early part of the decade, and I got to thank him I got to tell him that Blows Against the Empire was a really a gem in my collection, something that I really like. So we got to talk about that, which was technically the first Jefferson Starship album, probably the only one that you weren't on.
Yeah, exactly, and one of my favorites too, because I'm a big science fiction fan anyway, and that album had so many songs that really spoke to that idea of the science fiction, and you know, and also about you know, politics and society, and about, you know, it was a bit rebellious, you know, talking about taking over this starship and hijacking it, and you know, the peace and love generation goes Star Trek, you know, and I loved it. I thought it was a great album, and an honor to later hook up with some of those same guys. And you're right, it is kind of like a family. I remember joining, you know, being able to play with everybody and feeling like it was like a bunch of friends always getting together to play. We weren't really thinking too much about the business side as much as we were thinking about the, you know, how much fun it was just to make the art and play with each other.
Well, that's pretty much where you guys were. I mean, you were the 70s, you were laying the groundwork. I mean, the 60s was what it was, but it really wasn't until the 80s that music probably really became the business that it is right now. But you brought up something. I mean, that's what I wanted to mention about Flowers of the Night, is that song really carried on like that really spoke to me in terms of the revolutionary nature of what I thought the Jefferson Starship represented. And then you mentioned, you know, the politics, and you know, even though it was sort of housed and guised in science fiction, I did end up asking Paul Kantner about that several years ago. And he made it seem like, you know, he really expected that there would have been a more technologically advanced starship ready for the taking, say, about 1990, and that really never transpired.
As far as we know.
Yeah, right.
You never know what they're doing. We didn't know about a lot of that technology until they'd been playing around with it for decades. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that the human nature, whether it's in the form of technology or hundreds of years ago, with the Declaration of Independence, it's always that yearning for freedom and not wanting to be oppressed, and yet there's the other side of it, of the oppressors and the people that tend to try to take over things. You know, it's a timeless story in a way, but you know, the idea of the way music kind of opened a lot of people's eyes, for me, being a little kid almost, you know, back then during the 60s and hearing these songs, it was sort of it was sort of a way to open the eyes of a lot of people that weren't, you know, it gave us an alternative to, it was literally a counterculture that gave us an alternative to what our parents grew up with and some of the things they were indoctrinated with. It was sort of a way to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the best way to do things. Maybe there's a more fair way. Maybe there's a way to be more conscious of the environment. Maybe there's a way to, you know, respect people's rights. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that black people couldn't get in the bus, you know. I mean, so we were kind of coming on the tail of a lot of, you know, freedoms and a revolution, really, of people coming to grips with the idea that, you know, a lot of real altruistic values, you know, were brought to light more than what had been prior to that. And so it's kind of neat to see these group of musicians opening a whole generation's eyes to some things that have lasted a long time. I mean, there was a lot of lessons to be learned and a lot of important values. I mean, sure, the tie-dye and the paisley prints and all that stuff is going to come and go, and the lava lamps, but there was some core truth to all that I think were really valuable to learn, you know. And, you know, even though my parents and I didn't see eye to eye a lot in those days because of the generation gap and everything, I think at the end of the day, my parents realized that some of the values they tried to teach me, I was finding and expressing in this counterculture, and they realized too, thanks to a lot of music and stuff, opening our eyes that, yeah, you know what, there is a better way to handle some of these situations. And we started looking at politics and war and the way we treat our brothers and sisters in a more, more humane way. And I think a lot of that had to do with the music and those bands back then. I mean, obviously before I joined them, but that was an important force, and I guess it's always been that way to a degree, where artists and musicians and writers tend to take, the cutting edge when it comes to certain things like that, and it kind of helps point the way for the rest of us too.
Craig, let me reset. We're talking with Craig Chaquico, longtime guitar player for Jefferson Starship and Starship. His brand new album is coming out on October 16, 2012 on Blind Pig Records. It's called Fire Red Moon. It's more of a bluesy rock take than some of the other stuff he's been doing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to ask you, Craig, this is why I like to get you guys on the phone and scratch below the surface a little bit, because we have, we're able to get perceptions of what happens just through the music. I was able to read the book God a Revolution about the history of the Jefferson Starship and Jefferson Airplane. Was that a big part of the behind the scenes with the band? Was there a lot of political discussion between you and Kantner and Grace Slick and Marty Ballin? Was that a big part of the life on the road, or is that just something that came up from time to time?
Well, I think at that stage of that time of in the country, there was sort of this countercultural revolution, and there was sort of a feeling of us and them. There were the protests and things that, now that we all have a chance to take a breath and look back a little bit, we realized they were coming from a real honest and truthful place, and I think it helped change the country for the better in a lot of ways. That's really what Declaration of Independence was about, and freedoms and stuff. And I think, as far as, not that we got into really heavy political discussions, but that was that was sort of the theme of that era. There were questions being asked and raised that we were aware of, as and so that showed up in our lyrics. That showed up in the way we performed, and to the people that listened to our albums and came to our shows. But it wasn't. I think some people took it more seriously than others. I think there was. I gravitated towards it, but I wasn't as well versed and as passionate as as Paul was. He might have been the most in tune to that whole era and those political themes in his songs. But of course, the rest of us were influenced by it and made aware of it. But yeah, that was kind of part of what we all felt we were. Even if you weren't in a famous band, if you were just somebody that was looking around at the country and you had long hair or whatever, and you were part of this other alternative, you were sort of asking questions and going, well, what is the meaning of all this, and where is that common ground that we can find that's a little more just and true, and I guess every generation goes through that.
Well, Craig, you're saying this now, and it's something with the election of 2012, which is right around the corner. It's something that we really need more of right about now, and it's a shame that music isn't really carrying that torch as much as it once did. But let me go back and remind everybody that I want to remind Craig, some of the I want to remind the listeners of some of the great songs that you've played lead on and helped write over the years. We got Jane, Find Your Way Back, Miracles, Count on Me, Ride the Tiger, Stranger, all great songs. But two of my favorites from the Jefferson Starship canon are the lesser known Keep on Dreaming and Winds of Change, which kind of goes along with what we were just talking about a little bit.
Exactly. You're right. And there was that theme in a lot of our lyrics and stuff that talked a little more about not being so complacent and not maybe just, what's the term people use, drinking the Kool-Aid, where you kind of, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, everybody wants truth, right, I would think, at the bottom of it all. And so we had songs that kind of questioned that and looked at things through a different lens sometimes, instead of just the status quo. And, that's how change happens, and sometimes better, sometimes worse. But I think for the most part, a lot of those values and questions that we asked back then were important, and they had been asked hundreds of years before too by the founders of the Declaration of Independence and other cultures and societies. I honestly think that we're not alone. All of us are not alone in thinking these things, but it's just really odd to me that you'll find so much violence around some certain basic truths. It reminds me of a lyric that Paul Kantner wrote that was always one of my favorite ones. I'm probably not saying it right, but in one of his songs he said something about if Jesus and Muhammad met on the road to Damascus, would they what would they do? Would they start fighting each other in the middle of the road, about, oh, my God's better than your God? Or would these prophets be more likely to compare their similarities and talk about the fundamental truth, nature of their spirituality, and there's like the good karma sense of it all? And yet, somewhere along the line, that's at the core of all these religions, but then it ends up being turned into wars and innocent people dying, and you just wonder why, why does it have to go that way when really the fundamental truths of it are so much more pure, and truthful, more about getting along rather than fighting. And that's why I loved his lyric. Like, if Jesus and Muhammad met, what would they do? And yet you have all their followers trying to kill each other, and, the ones that are the icons of these different religions, and Buddha and everybody, they would probably get together, and I don't think they'd have a brawl in the middle of the road if they met. I think they would be more like these spiritual, evolved people, comparing notes rather than trying to kill each other. So
exactly.
That's just my humble opinion about it.
Good stuff, Craig. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. Thanks.
Because I got a stack. I've been working hard all morning here.
Okay.
Craig, the predecessor of Jefferson Starship, we've been talking about him. Jefferson Airplane are members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Let's keep on the subject matter of voting or politics and voting. Now that Rush and Deep Purple have been nominated in 2012, do you see a day when the Jefferson Starship will get the nod to make it all the way out to Cleveland?
Wait, you mean we didn't make it yet?
I don't think so.
Hey, I would never say no. I think it's kind of funny though, because I think we're there. I guess with Jefferson Airplane and stuff, all our albums are there. And somebody at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was kind of joking with me, going, "Well, technically Jefferson Starship hasn't been inducted, but man, you're on all the, me, Craig, you're on all the albums we have for all, because they have all the albums in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that we've done. So hey, I'm there already. I'm just happy to be part of the band and made the music. Whether or not I get, my name on their Hall of Fame plaque, that's another thing. I'm just grateful that I was able to be there and help make the music.
Yeah, they need a bigger room to get all of you on stage if that ever happens.
Well, that's the other thing. I can't think of too many bands, if you think about Jefferson Airplane, Jefferson Starship, and Starship, that have gone through so many members. I think just when I was in the band, from Jefferson Starship till 1973 till 1990, counting all the singers and drummers and musicians and keyboard players and everything, it was like 17 different musicians came and went, and I was I always felt like I was the new kid on the block, the kid in the band. But all of a sudden I looked around and I realized I was the elder statesman and the only one that had been there the whole time. And I asked myself, how did that happen so fast? And when I think about it, it actually took a couple of decades. And it's like, whoa, where did the time go so fast? But yeah, you're right. It would be a pretty full stage if we ever got together and had everybody that ever played in that lineup, man. It'd be fun, but there'd be a couple of people posthumously that we'd have to, play a tape of them because they're not around anymore.
Yeah, hold a candle for them.
It'd be interesting, maybe someday.
Hey, Craig, I get to speak to a lot of my heroes who gained a lot of notoriety on MTV. For a while there, Jefferson Starship was the band on the channel. 1984, there was a special Jefferson Starship cruise. You played the New Year's Eve show in 1985, and then you had a big spring break concert in 1986. It was almost like you guys were the MTV house band there for a while.
Yeah, you're right. Now that I think about it, yeah, I remember all those shows, and I remember the spring break and the New Year's and all of that. It's kind of funny. New Year's comes to mind because I don't know how apparent it was on the actual broadcast, but it was like they had thousands of ping pong balls in these nets above the stage in the audience, and they thought, well, at New Year's, so the confetti will drop these ping pong balls, which is really a cool idea. And yet, once people are celebrating the New Year and they've got thousands of ping pong balls falling out of the sky, it's like, what are you going to do now? So it was, instead of a food fight, it was a ping pong ball fight. Man, we felt like we were in the middle of one of those paint wars, There was just ping pong balls everywhere. So if I ever see a ping pong ball again in more than one or two, I start to get a little nervous.
Well, it didn't impact your playing too much, I guess.
No, it would be a lot different if they were throwing something with more mass. Ping balls are light enough that it's like playing in a snowstorm.
All right. Speaking of MTV, Craig, in 1984, did you begin carving out a role for yourself in a Mick and Slick administration?
I was going to be in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Let's see, what was my role in the administration? I don't think we got that far, but we enjoyed that theme because that was an election year too, and it was Mick and Slick in '88, and we had bumper stickers and everything. That was a really fun period because I think we actually did a video that had a lot of politicians and stuff in it, and you know, it was a little bit. I took it in my own mind as kind of making fun a little bit of how the politics three-ring circus was starting to look a little bit like big-time wrestling to me. It was starting to look like a lot of form and a lot of, you know, makeup and camera angles and where was the substance? You know, it became, and it still feels that way to me. It feels like a lot of it is based on entertainment and on, well, obviously TV is ever since the Nixon Kennedy debates, you realize how much image and perception is a part of how people vote, you know, and at some point it can cross the line to be a little too theatrical and a little bit too much like big-time wrestling, where everything becomes a soundbite and everything becomes a, you know, some sort of manufactured, almost plastic media cardboard cutout of these characters. You know, it's like, who are they really? You know, I mean, so that was our take on the Mick and Slick in '88 when we were doing the videos. It was more or less saying there's people that are on the front lines laying it on the line. There was a song that I wrote called "Laying It on the Line" that talks about, well, yeah, there's these politicians and they're all talking about reasons to go to war in places we've never heard of, but it's our sons and daughters and us, and those are the people that are laying it on the line. And what, you know, where is the truth? Where's the common ground there? What makes that just and right? And, you know, so we were kind of pointing our fingers at the difference between the people that lay it on the line that really have to go and serve, and then those that sort of play this kind of theatrical game of politics where, you know, it started to feel like personalities in big-time wrestling rather than, you know, wait a minute, you're actually sending people over there to die, and God bless them all who have done that and supported our freedoms, but sometimes the reasoning behind it is questionable. And so that was kind of our gist on that song.
Craig, I'll tell you one thing. I was probably the only guy in America who really took you seriously, because in the summer of 1984, MTV began registering voters and had promoted a voter registration drive. And at that moment, I was like, I think this channel is going to try to make a play here for the presidency. And this was me in 1984, and I was 18, and I guess I had some other things on my mind because it lasted with me for a couple of years. So I was actually disappointed when 1988 rolled around and there was no Mick and Slick on the ballot, but instead MTV gave us Randy of the Redwoods.
Well, there you go, man. I think we all could have done better for world leaders, and Grace and Mickey would be the first to tell you that they would probably not be as qualified as some other folks. But I think the idea was to just sort of, you know, open your eyes and kind of try to see the difference between here we were, you know, kind of making a joke of it, but like how serious are these other people that are supposed to be doing it for real? I mean, where's the truth in their advertising, right? So, but I'm glad you picked up on that. I mean, at least that people are aware of the power to vote and stuff. Although sometimes I get a little cynical even about that. I almost start to feel like, you know, after all these years, it's like no matter who you vote for, I start to question, is it really making that much of a difference? Could there possibly, now you're getting me into all my conspiracy theories. Don't get me started.
But you know what, I'm right there with you, because I feel like nothing, I've been watching since '76, you know, since I was an 11-year-old, and nothing changes, Craig. Nothing ever changes. Yeah.
You know, the only hope is to be aware of it as much as we can, and that's even hard to do with the media. How do you trust the things you hear? You know, it's like you can hear the same story reported on by two different people, and it's like a different story depending on who's telling it and who's got an agenda or a spin on it. And it's really hard sometimes to know where the truth is. So I think all we can do is just keep open to as much information as we can, and that, even then, who's controlling that? You know, I talked to my son. You know, he's 21 now. We have a lot of in-depth conversations about this, like how do we really know what's going on, and how, you know, what can we do to be aware and to vote responsibly, and does it make a difference, and how can we, you know, make a difference? And all I can say to him is, don't get so freaked out about it that you can't live your life and that you live in fear over all this, but yet don't be so complacent that you just believe everything you're told. You know, at some point, you know, we all have a responsibility to ask these questions, and you know, it's just hard to know where to draw the line, and you know what you can really do in the end. But I think not being just so gullible helps. and I say this as one of the most gullible people I know, but I do think that it helps to be more observant.
I'd love to see the music community stand up a little bit and, address some of these issues, now here in 2012 in the same way they did maybe in the 60s and 70s, and maybe, agree on some small steps that we can take to move this thing in the right direction. And one of the things that I think could, needs to be done is the way elections are undertaken. A, the process goes on way too long. B, primaries mean absolutely nothing, because by the time it rolls around for us to vote for who we want to choose in New York and New Jersey come May, that decision's already been made. So the power of democracy is really taken out of our hands to begin with anyway. So there's a lot of simple things that need to be addressed. But maybe some other time, Craig, we can talk about this. Let me move forward and let me reset again at the same time. We have Craig Chaquico on the phone with us. CraigChaquico.com. It is a bit of a tongue twister for me, but is the website. Fire Red Moon is the brand new album coming out October 16, 2012 on Blind Pig Records, Craig's debut over there. So another era of the band rolls around, Craig. The Jeffersons dropped for a more streamlined Starship, and the hits just keep on coming. You got Sarah, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, It's Not Over, and the ubiquitous We Built This City. What was your reaction to We Built This City consistently charting high on the various worst songs of all time list?
I think that's not accurate, because I know for a fact we did a lot worse songs than We Built This City. I know that for a fact. No, I'm not going to say the song's good or bad or worse or whatever. I mean, I think it's kind of funny. I think you can listen to anything over and over again and start to hate it. But, We Built This City, I thought, was pretty innovative at the time. And me being a team player in the band, it's like, oh, here's a new song. I mean, you got to remember, I was on every song and album, so there was a lot of stylistic changes, and I thought that was cool because we had so many different songwriters in the band that came and went, and it was kind of fun for me as a guitar player to wear different musical hats. It was a little intimidating sometimes because I felt like I was kind of in the deep end a few times, faking it with all these different styles, but it was really exciting to kind of have that variety. But my roots are more guitar-oriented, more rock-oriented. My new album, Fire Red Moon, is more in that vein of blues rock kind of a stuff. But We Built the City, I thought, was a fantastic song and arrangement. And the idea about the lyrics, I always thought, was more or less a lot of the clubs that musicians used to play to learn their craft. I mean, that was your sort of your way to be. There was not many places you could learn how to be a professional musician. You couldn't exactly learn it in high school or college back then. And the places that people would develop their art were in the music clubs and stuff. And those were turning into more of programmed music and DJs and disco, basically. And so a lot of the live music was evaporating. And so there was no place for people to go and learn their art and express themselves. And so it was kind of like saying, hey, don't forget, we built this city, not us, the band, but as an art form, it was built on rock and roll and about the idea that there's bands that want to go out and play live, and if you're going to just use disco and all of this, then you're kind of, I mean, that's great too, if you're in the mood, but you're kind of leaving out all the live music, and so that was kind of the idea of it. And I interpret the lyrics differently than Bernie Taupin had written them. What a fantastic lyricist, he'd written lyrics for Elton John and everything, but me just being the guitar player in the band and not writing the lyrics, I interpreted one of the lines like Marconi played the mambo.
Right.
Listen to the radio. I don't know what Bernie meant by that, which is kind of cool about his lyrics, is we can all read into it. But I always thought it was kind of like, well, here's the guy who invented the radio and the technology, and that's what we listen to, but look at how much the music has changed and will continue to change. It's like Marconi played this style of music and he invented the radio, but now look at what the radio plays years later. Marconi had no idea that there would be that kind of music on the radio, or We Built a City or rap or anything else, so it's, and Tommy Dorsey before that. So it's kind of neat when you think of this technology he invented having a life of its own and all the different art forms that come over the radio, and he had no idea. He was playing the mambo, so that was my interpretation. Bernie's probably going, no, that's not what I meant at all, but that's how I took it. And as far as being like it voted the worst song in the world, I'd say everybody's got an opinion. I can't argue with them.
Right. I like the song, and like I said, that was all over MTV, all over the radio. You couldn't get away from it for almost 18 months. So at the very least, how many millions of people have heard you perform because of that track?
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It wasn't real guitar heavy necessarily, like some of our songs, like some of the songs I wrote, but it was definitely, I mean, the vocals and the arrangement and that the technology. I mean, you got to remember in 1983 that some of those techniques and recording techniques and stuff were pretty much state of the art. You know, it was exciting for me to be around such great producers like Peter Wolf and, you know, lyricists like Bernie Taupin. I mean, I really felt like I was again, sometimes I feel like I'm faking it. Like, what am I doing here with all these great guys? But it was a very inspiring to be around that energy and that kind of stuff. But again, that's the way it always was with me in the band. There were always people coming along with new ideas and things to be part of it. It was just such a blessing to kind of feel like, wow, I get to be part of this now. So, you know, Grace had a good way of looking at it. She said, you know, sometimes when you're in a band or you're a singer and you're viewing other people's material, it's kind of like being an actor where you fit the role. You know, you really dive into the part. And if you're playing the actor that's the bad guy or the hero or whatever, you got to kind of live and breathe that part. And so when you play a real pop song, you got to be that pop, you know, musician. But when you're playing the more rockin' tune, then you assume that role and you put yourself into it. And I guess like an actor, some people are really good at certain roles and some people enjoy playing different things and stretching themselves. And in the audience, some audiences are going to like them better in one role than the other. And I think there were people that loved Built the City and there were people that hated it. You know, the more rockers probably hated it, and then the more pop people probably loved it, you know. And I was glad to be part of it. You know, I'm glad I was the guitar player in there. I do gravitate more towards songs like you mentioned earlier. Jane was one which I helped write, which had a lot of guitar in it. And I remember having to sort of fight for the guitar solo because someone had mentioned, our manager said that guitar solo is too long and it's never going to get played on the radio. It won't get played unless you cut that solo. And the whole band backed me up, and I know Ainsley Dunbar and I kind of had to stand in front of the tape machine at one point because we were afraid somebody was going to go up there with a razor blade and start slicing out, you know, tape to edit the solo. And if you listen to the solo now, it really is just me and Ainsley in the guitar solo. There's hardly anybody else playing, and I arranged it that way because I wanted people to really have no choice but to listen to the guitar. Being the lead guitar player, I figured, hey, this is my chance to really make it, arrange the song for my benefit. So I did, and the guitar is really in your face, but it was a long solo, and I felt bad because our manager was actually kind of right, because he said, you know, no songs get played on the radio with this long a solo, and I went home and tried to find the other songs on the radio that had a solo that long, and I couldn't find any. But the song came out, and it actually was a hit, and every time I hear it on the radio, I have to smile because, oh, my God, I had to fight for every second of that guitar solo, and it ended up in the final version. And to this day, I had the guys in Metallica come up to me one time and say, hey, we really like that song, Jane, because when we were in high school, that was the only song that had a long guitar solo on the radio. So in a way, our manager was right, and in a way, we were right because we kept it in there, and it ended up working out best for everybody, I guess.
And you're responsible for Metallica.
I know. I just think it was interesting that they said they liked that song on the radio because they said at the time nobody else was playing songs with that long of a guitar solo. And I remember thinking I was mad at our manager for saying that nothing gets played on the radio with long guitar solos anymore because he wanted to cut it out. And I'm glad we left it in, but in the end of the day, he was kind of right. Most songs didn't get played with that long of a solo. And I was just glad to hear that, you know, somebody from Metallica would remember the days of when there weren't a lot of guitar solos, and they're all about guitar, you know, so it was kind of neat when they said, oh, yeah, we remember that. Nobody else was doing long guitar solos there, so.
Craig, I'm going to jump ahead and get to your new CD because we've been, it seems like we could go on for hours, and I still have a stack, but we're not going to be able to get to everything right now. Craig Chaquico is on the phone with us right now, longtime member of Jefferson Starship and Starship, solo artist in his own right, really pioneering the new age and contemporary jazz stylings since the early 1990s. Your new CD, Fire Red Moon, is kind of a departure from your body of solo work and a return to your rock days. Fire Red Moon opens with the signature blues rock voice of Noah Hunt and closes with the blues anthem of Crossroads, with plenty of fiery licks in between. Why change it up now, Craig, at this stage of your career when your fans have come to expect a new age contemporary jazz guitar approach?
Well, you know, I guess if I would have thought along those lines, I never would have done a contemporary instrumental jazz new age approach either, because people expected me to do more rock and electric guitar. And so when I switched over, that was kind of a change. But to me, it's all blues based anyway. I feel like my playing even though I've had the chance to play a lot of different styles with the band and, you know, my solo stuff, it's really all pretty much blues-based. I grew up listening to Hendrix and Clapton and Santana and, you know, Pink Floyd and Zeppelin, and for whatever reason, that was kind of how I learned the language of music. You know, I look at music as a vocabulary of things that, you know, how we speak a language, we sort of learn by learning words from other people, and then eventually we're able to put our own sentences together. I think music is a language too, and we sort of I learned the language of music by listening to other people speak in the language of music, and I learned a few words here and there, so to speak, from different artists, and I eventually was able to put it together with my own sentences. But because of that, it's all rock and roll to me, whether it's the pop stuff that Starship did, or the rock stuff, or the ballads, to my new age jazz stuff. To me, it's still the basic kind of blues rock sort of thing. And you know, I had no idea that when I went solo that I'd get nominated for a Grammy or sell 1 million records or any of that. The reason I started playing the acoustic guitar more was that my wife got pregnant, and the acoustic guitar was a lot more welcome around the house than the electric. Little did I know it would lead to, you know, a 20-year career of that style of music, you know. But now my son's 21, and he reminds me, he goes, "Dad, I'm not in the womb anymore. You don't have to play so quiet. You can play louder music if you want." And in a way, I started doing that in my concerts, even though I'll play a jazz concert with Larry Carlton or George Benson or somebody. I can actually go back now and play a few of my Starship hits from the 70s and 80s, and it seems to go over pretty good as long as I don't overdo it. You know, the audience is up for that evolution somewhat, you know, or that look back. And I think doing a blues record is a natural evolution that kind of ties it all together. You know, to me, since I learned guitar by listening to rock and blues, to be able to do a rock and blues album now is, you know, as a guitar player, it's very gratifying, and it kind of makes sense to me. Although you might say, why would you change it up like that? I look at changing from the Starship to my solo career as quite a bit of a change. And it reminds me of the Hollywood freeway. If you're in California and you're on this like really busy freeway with all this traffic and you're surrounded by all these neon lights, that's the Hollywood freeway. But if you stay on it long enough, it turns into the Redwood Highway, and you're surrounded by redwood trees and nature. And I look at my musical career as that same kind of highway, depending on where you are along the road. It's either the Hollywood freeway, or it's the Redwoods Highway, or any place in between where there's a scenic, you know, turnout. And right now I'm taking that scenic blues boulevard, you know, and that's feels to me as all part of the same road, just a different, you know, different part of that stretch. So well, for me, musically, it makes perfect sense for me. I hope people like it, but I like it. I like playing it. So
it's really great for you because it's enabled you to continue your career that you established all the way back in the 70s, whereas the music of the Starship might not have been as relevant in the 90s up till now. You've been able to, you had the wherewithal to do it, and it really worked out well for you. I just got two more, Craig, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Your story of emergence as a musical icon is similar to Neil Sean's, as you both established San Francisco-based, as you both joined established San Francisco-based musical legends at a young age. You were both born in the same year. Are you friends with Neil?
I'm sorry, I've never. Who are you? I've never heard of that. No, it's funny. We are the same age, and we are friends. We have a lot of similar hobbies and likes, and you know, it's just so funny. Sometimes we'll run into each other riding our motorcycles, and we'll be in the middle of nowhere, and I'll go, "Wait a minute, there's Neil Sean," and he's probably going, "Hey, there's Craig Chaquico," and we'll, you know, compare notes literally. When I was first playing, the Starship would record at night, and Santana would record in the afternoon in the same studio, and we would sometimes pass each other in the hall as kids that were barely old enough to drive. I mean, even when we first started, you know, we were both 16, 17 years old. And I remember, I'll never forget walking into the studio kind of early for one of our night sessions, and Neil was still the last guy left from the Santana session, and he was in the studio playing this amazing guitar. And I remember walking by and looking through the control room glass going, "Who's that other kid? You know, man, he's great." I mean, you know, hopefully there's not any more of those guys around, because I thought I was kind of special being young and playing, and there was this other kid, and I've always felt like we were both kind of, you know, brothers from different mothers in that sense, because you're right, we had similar, you know, kind of a similar pedigree in a way. But I've always really admired his playing and consider it an honor to be put in the same category with him sometimes. Right,
I think Neil's got a solo album coming out for the first time. Would you guys ever consider working together?
You know, I'd love to. I know that when I did my solo record that was a little more acoustic guitar-based, Acoustic Highway, Neil came out with a record shortly after that on the same label called Electric Planet. that I really enjoyed, and I think the two of us kind of naturally follow the same. We might listen to some of the same people growing up, and we sort of follow the same musical path sometimes. I would love to do a project with him or do some shows with him, or maybe we can do a tour together or something someday. But yeah, that would be great.
Final question, Craig, is I had the pleasure of meeting Grace Slick at an art exhibit. She was really very nice and had herself together at that time. And like Grace, I know you're an accomplished artist yourself. Did having a love of painting help you bond with her early on?
Well, yeah, that's really interesting, because the first albums I did, she was in the studio painting pictures of the various musicians. And there was the Manhole album, that her solo record that I was one of the guitar players on, has these great little paintings and the artwork of her painting me and David Crosby and Jerry Garcia and everybody that played on her album. And I always thought that was pretty cool because, for me, I think fundamentally, I took a lot of art classes when I was in school, and I thought I would be more of a commercial artist, and a musician was a passion and a love of mine, but I never really thought that I could get gainful employment doing it. I thought I'd have to have a real regular job, and my regular job was going to be something to do with art. So with all the art classes, I started to realize how similar those concepts were to my music. And when I make a record, to the first solo record, to the Starship records, to my new album now, Fire Red Moon, I almost look at it as if it's a painting for the ears. In other words, you get in between the speakers, and you have your left, your right, your up, your down, your top and bottom, and it's like that's the painting, only it's a painting for your ears. And the same concepts of a good painting, I think, go into a good production. Like you have something in the foreground, something in the background, you have a subject matter, you have contrast, you have color, intensity, hue, harmony. All of these are totally synonymous between music and art, and I really get that at least when I apply those art concepts to my music. It really is exciting for me because I feel like you do use some of the same concepts, and they're both vibrations, right? One's vibration of light that you perceive with your eyes, one's vibration of music that you perceive with your ears. And so, to me, there's always been that kind of magic between magic and math, or between arithmetic and angels, between science and spirituality. There's this sort of a science and then a magical side, and I think music somehow fits right in the middle because it's so mathematical and yet magical. It's invisible and it can fill a room, and I feel that connection to art and to Grace's art and to the art I even do to this day with my new album of being, dealing with those same, kind of concepts. And at the end of the day, whether it's a painting or a song, it's got to really have emotion. It's got to have feeling, because that's what touches all of us when we see a painting or hear a song. Is how does it make you feel? Does it bring a tear to your eye? Does it make you happy? Does it make you sad? Does it make you remember someone you love, someone you miss? Does it make you optimistic? Does it make you sit on the edge of your chair? What's going to happen next? So like a good movie or a good painting or a good album, I think all have those same characteristics. So at the end of the day, if I can use what I've learned in art and music and being in a band with Grace Slick to eventually just touch somebody emotionally and make them feel, then that's mission accomplished. That's to me the pinnacle of the art, is when you can really make someone feel like you're speaking to them, in a real deep way by what you're playing, and that emotional resonance is kind of what reminds us that we're all related. None of us are alone in our feelings, and having that joy and that sorrow and that passion and that love and that all those things that we get out of a song, when you communicate that to another person you don't even know, and they start feeling those feelings, then you're kind of communicating on a higher, I don't know, it's like a higher level or something that really is rewarding for me as an artist, to think that sometimes I might get to that point where I'm really touching somebody on an emotional level.
Craig, two things, because you brought him up a little bit. There's an artist based out of New York City. His name is Joseph Arthur. He actually plays in a band with Donnie Harrison, George Harrison's son. And when he performs his concert, he is creating canvases. So you got that. And have you ever considered putting out or trying to compose like a multimedia project with music and visuals?
Well, when I did my first album, my first solo record, before I knew if anybody would ever listen to it, I did a little poem for each song. Even though the song was instrumental, there was a little poem that talked about the emotion behind that particular tune. And then there was a drawing I did that was also so for the first songs on my first album, there's a series of drawings and poetry that goes with each song on the album. And the poetry's on the album. The drawings never got done in time. Only a few got completed by the time the album came out. So that's sort of still a work in progress. But the whole idea of mixed media is really fascinating to me, to be able to incorporate incorporate that. And when I do my live shows, we actually incorporate some different, special effects and some storytelling and stuff. So it's more than just, I like to think it's more than just somebody up there playing a guitar. There's like a feeling that when you've come to a Craig Chaquico concert, you leave with an experience of, as if you, hopefully maybe just read a good book or saw a good movie, because all your emotions were touched and brought out, besides just the music, but with some of the stories and some of the imagery and things that we try to bring into a show. So you're, kind of happy, sad, romantic, adventurous. All those things can happen at a show. And if we can bring that out even more someday with, like you said, maybe some painting or a mixed media approach. I mean, I've often dreamed about that, having like a slideshow, a big giant slideshow, and I do a song about a return of the eagle, which is about watching the endangered species, this beautiful eagle, fly back in the environment, knowing that it was almost extinct. Having a slideshow that goes along with that. I try to tell a story before the song to set the mood, but like to make it even more effective, having, visuals of that. I mean, I do some songs that are inspired by Native America, and I actually am lucky enough sometimes to have a Grammy-nominated Native American flute player come out as a surprise during one of the songs to make it even more vivid, to bring out that inspiration in the song. So to me, there's always more than just me playing guitar. There's all different ways to enhance that, and I'm really open to that idea if that could ever happen even more.
Right, you definitely have a wide palette to choose from there, Craig. And Craig, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. And I've had many of my heroes and musical idols join me many times. So hopefully we can do this again sometime down the road. And I'm aiming for a national syndicated show, so I'll invite you back.
Hey, sounds great, Rich. Thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to when our paths might cross again soon.
Good luck with the new album, Fire Red Moon, okay?
Hey, thanks, Rich. Appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to the Rockin Rich Lynch on the Radio Show, part of the SoundPress.net radio network. Remember, if you're a band or artist looking for promotion, or if you'd like to sponsor this show or add this program to your station, please get in touch with us today at SoundPress.net.